Hi, I'm Hamish Black and welcome to Writing on Games. When I first played For Honor in the open beta, and later when Ubisoft sent me a code for the full game, I thought it was kind of a mess. Systems upon menus upon systems bombarded me with information on stances and pickups and combat modes and the like. In fact, the story mode tutorializes all this twice for some reason, and with so much to take in, the experience ended up feeling a little diluted. It felt like modes we typically associate with other genres, such as shooters, were being jammed onto this weighty, slow-paced melee framework where they didn't necessarily gel because, hey, it's a multiplayer game, right? It seemed like I was playing this kind of weird mix of Lords of the Fallen meets Dynasty Warriors meets rock, paper, scissors, and as such it kind of felt like I was playing a game with a real identity crisis. Slap onto that a single-player story mode that would suck real ass even if the servers weren't constantly booting me to the menu during cutscenes, forcing me to replay levels I just finished, and you have a game that I was absolutely ready to write off as a potentially novel but ultimately failed experiment. But then there's that moment where all the chaos subsides, the battlefield clears, and like the quiet, eerie violin flutters evoking Arvo Part's Fratris in the main menu, the palpable tension of the one-on-one combat system rears its head. When it's just you and one other guy standing there, not moving, but sure as shit letting them know that you're thinking about it, just waiting to see who will be ballsy enough to strike first, that's when the potential beauty of For Honor really becomes apparent. I anticipate a lot of discussion surrounding this game will feature fairly lazy comparisons to Souls games because of the focus on this weighty melee combat. But in actual fact, the game it reminded me of most was Bushido Blade, where not only will combatants build up the tension for ages before a flash of conflict leaves one person standing, but there really is a sense of, well, honor to these encounters. And whilst this honor system isn't as codified as it is in Bushido Blade, where you couldn't see the ending of that game if you fought dirty, there is still something appealingly chivalrous to the combat here. I mean, imagine my shock when, after my first one-on-one duel where I lost horribly, my opponent headed into the chat to say good fight. Or when I was attacked whilst typing a message, and my opponent actually backed off and apologised for his haste. In my experience with the game so far, this kind of nobility in battle has been uncharacteristically common for a multiplayer game, and I don't doubt that the game's aesthetic and design play a role in that. To me, it seems that players recognise the significance of the characters they're playing. Whilst placed in perhaps unrealistic proximity to one another, in a broad sense there is an historic overlap between the existence of the game's three classes, Knight, Viking and Samurai. And I don't think it's coincidence that these types of fighters all had their own codes of honour. A lot of care has clearly been put into the historical accuracy of the fighters' movesets and weaponry, and I personally find that this care also extends to the general design of the game's combat loop. That loop involves you coming across an enemy and entering guard mode, where the camera draws in on your character whilst locking onto the opponent. The screen letterboxes, further drawing your attention to the centre of the screen, where you must try and second guess which side of the triangle your opponent is facing in order to block their incoming hits, and get yours in when they don't expect you to. Like I say, at first it feels a little like rock, paper, scissors until you realise that A, you can react and counter if you're fast enough, and B, it's a game of rock, paper, scissors where if you lose you get a fuck off sword in your face. The combat is weighty, but the actual fights tend to end fairly quickly once the swords start swinging. Alongside this, there are options at your disposal in terms of avoiding damage. However, the focus is clearly on closing that gap and drawing out enemy attacks. You can dodge, but there doesn't appear to be much in the way of invincibility frames, at least that I can see. It doesn't matter when you hit the dodge button, if that swing connects, you're taking that damage. All of this means that when you lose, you didn't lose because you ran away, most of the time at least. You stood your ground and were bested by a worthy foe up close and personal. It's downright gallant. That is, however, until you get to the modes more typical of a multiplayer focused game. Here, the courtly tension of battling a single opponent is replaced with the somewhat unfocused chaos of the game's multiple systems, like capturing points but also fighting grunts that go down in one hit, and also you have pickups which give you boosts mid-battle, but there's also a loot element which seems fairly inconsequential at this stage, and, well, yeah, it's a bit of a mess. Above all else, however, you're confronted with the game's key balancing issue in my eyes, the near impossible task of winning any fight that isn't one-on-one. I've never done it myself, and hey, maybe I'm just terrible at the game. Having also been on the other side of that equation, however, and massacred all lone soldiers with one comrade, I think I can safely say at this stage that teamwork in this game is borderline broken. Seriously, if you're playing the capture the points dominion mode, follow a teammate. You can pretty much clean house if you and even just one other person go from point to point, eliminating the likely lone schmuck on the other team trying to take it for himself. Having to focus on two enemies at once when your health bar goes down that quickly sure is tense, but it often feels unwinnable. More importantly, however, it goes against what I really do enjoy about the game's one-on-one battles, and hell, the game's namesake, its sense of honour. Even though the game tutorializes fighting multiple enemies, it always feels like you're ganking someone. It removes any weight from the multiple encounters you'll come across in a match. On the off chance you take some damage, just run away and let your partner handle things for a bit before returning to finish the poor sod off. After that, you've just got to worry about other points, so you forget about that guy and run off to the next almost assured victory, or go and kill some grunts in one hit or something. It's not all bad, and that mode can be fun once in a while if you just want some chaotic, noisy multiplayer scenarios, but gone is the sense of pacing that comes from removing all the surrounding bullshit and getting down to just you and one other person. It's a narrative you create. Instead of just being another fight, another point to tally on a scoreboard, this opponent becomes your nemesis. Through multiple rounds, you learn their particular style, their strengths, and their tells. You don't just play with the game's systems, you engage in psychological warfare. I've had fights that start with over a minute of mechanical silence and end within seconds once someone gave their hand away too soon. That's something you just don't get in what will probably be considered the game's main modes due to their focus on quickly moving to capture points as opposed to focusing on the combat itself, and that's a real shame. That said, there really is something to the depth of this combat system, and I can only hope that people gravitate towards what seems like the game's obvious strength to me, the way it incentivizes honour. So I hope you enjoyed my review of For Honor. I really didn't expect much from this game, but whilst it isn't perfect, there's something supremely addictive about the one-on-one combat here. I don't know if I'd recommend splurging 40 quid on this game just yet, but hey, if you're into deep combat systems, you could do a lot worse. I'd also just like to sincerely thank my patrons, without whom this show would not be possible. If you want your name shown here or access to various goodies, then please consider checking out the Patreon. Pledges as small as $1 help me out more than you can possibly know. Also, check out the weekly podcast I do with my friend Nico as well, and leave a review on iTunes if you feel so inclined. And with all of that said, I'm Hamish Black, and this has been Writing on Games. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.